You are listening to If These Woods Could Talk, produced by the Rhinelander District Library. More information can be found at rhinelanderlibrary.org. Now follow If These Woods Could Talk on Facebook for new episodes, other history blurbs, and civil discussion. If these woods could talk, they might invite you out for a cold product of Old Rhinelander. I recently got to sit down with Georgiana Carl, General Manager of the Rhinelander Brewing Company tap room on Brown Street. Georgiana regaled us with a brief history of Rhinelander Brewing, from its initial factory opening in 1893 to Prohibition, bankruptcy, and until today, well into the brewery's comeback. In this episode, you will hear a few questions that we were unable to answer. If you know something, please let us know at facebook.com/ifthesewoodscouldtalk.
If these woods could talk, would you sit and listen to tales of those who came before us in the virgin pines with the river glistening? Sit on back with friendlies, share some stories about butterflies, days gone by on the sunset hill of glory.
What's going on?
My name is Georgiana Carl. I am the general manager of the Rhinelander Brewery in downtown Rhinelander.
Great. And probably worth mentioning, we're here in the tap room. So we're here to talk about the history of the Rhinelander Brewing Company.
Yeah.
So, first of all, there's some debate about the actual foundation of the company, right? I see like 1892, 1890, 1880.
Right. So it does kind of spread around there. And somewhere in there is, the actual founding date. I think where that gets a little skewed is 1890 is when our founding fathers, Henry Danner and Otto Hilgerman, were getting the brewery built and ready for operation. But the doors actually didn't open until 1893.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. And that original brewery was about 7 blocks away from where our current tap room is, over on Ocala Street on the Pelican River. It started out with a 30,000 barrel a year capacity, so it was definitely not a small operation. To give you an idea of that, our current little on-site brewery that we have for the Hodeg Ales and Lagers is about 100 barrels a year, so a huge scale difference from what we're doing now here in Rhinelander.
Yes. 30,000?
Yeah, 30,000 a year, and it actually goes up from there a few years later after Prohibition. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Big scale.
Yeah. Henry Danner was seeking refuge for himself from his brewery in North Dakota, so he was brewing prior to coming to Rhinelander. North Dakota, that brewery had just joined the Union and enacted Prohibition a lot earlier than what we actually saw in this area. And he didn't want to stop brewing. So he had been brewing there for over 25 years and got with his friend and business partner, Otto Hilgerman, who helped fund the move of all of the equipment from North Dakota to Rhinelander. And we really aren't sure what prompted them to come to Rhinelander. That's, still out there, not sure. But at the time, the logging industry was booming, and there were a lot of thirsty lumberjacks who I'm sure were very happy to have locally made beer.
I would think so.
And actually, just 4 years later, after the brewery opened its doors, so in 1897, the brewery actually burned down and had to be rebuilt.
All right. So, if we could step back for a second.
Yeah.
You talk about moving the equipment from, do you say South Dakota?
North Dakota.
North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
How big is this equipment? It sounds like something you need a truck for,
I mean,
a semi.
Yeah, I would assume it took a lot of big horses, whatever it was at the time, to drive all that stuff out here.
Yeah.
And, I can't even imagine the capacity, with the way transit is now, and you know, the logistics of all of that, I can't imagine what it was like in the late 1800s for that.
No, not really.
Yeah, because you're probably talking huge. I mean, for 30,000 barrels a year, you're probably talking huge pieces of equipment, huge tanks and everything. I mean, you know, just what we have on site here is big compared to like me in stature.
Right.
And I think they're only 3 barrels our fermenters are. So, you know, I don't know exactly what the fermenters looked like then, but I would assume they were a much greater scale than what we even have here. So
More than 3.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah. So unfortunately, eventually Prohibition did catch up to Wisconsin. And like many other breweries, the Rhinelander Brewery had to shut down operations in 1919. All of our brewing equipment was then sold off to a company in Mexico, so it was moved again.
Okay.
And as far as we can tell, Henry and Otto never really had much to do with the brewery again. However, as soon as the ink was dry on the 21st Amendment, which lifted Prohibition 13 years later, Otto's son, George Hilgerman, and his buddy, J.R. Caldwell, started the company back up again. They got the brewery cleaned out, staff hired, but ran into the issue of not having brewery equipment, and it was quite expensive, so they also couldn't afford it on their own. Larry Henning is who came in to help with that, the financial aspect of that, and was provided all of the kettles, tanks, and vats for the brewery on the condition that they provided him stock in the company for what he was owed, thus giving Larry controlling share of the company.
Okay.
Which was great for the brewery, but not so much for George Hilgerman and J.R. Caldwell. Larry ended up taking over operations less than a year later. So that original Otto Hilgerman, who started up, his son worked hard after Prohibition to get it going again, and they just kind of lost control of the company to who helped fund everything. So,
Sure.
you know.
Okay.
And Larry Henning is who actually hired Otto Dietz, who is known as our longest tenured brewmeister in Rhinelander's history. Mm-hmm.
A lot of people named Otto back then.
I know, isn't that
That's
interesting?
kinda weird.
I know. I remember reading through this, and I'm like, I don't think I've ever met an Otto in my life.
Not
and
one.
then there's 2 very prominent ones in our history, right? Otto Dietz brewed for Rhinelander from 1933 until he retired in 1966.
Okay.
While he was brewing, one of the things that we're most known for actually came out in January of 1940, and that was the Rhinelander Shorty.
Okay.
It was a little 7-ish ounce glass bottle with Rhinelander Shorty on it, so it had the Rhinelander Lager in it. Or Rhinelander Export Lager, as some people know it. It was marketed as the brewery's New Year baby, and led to record profits and growth for the company. Biggest contributor to the Shorty being so successful was actually the ad campaigns that they put out. So there's a lot of Shorty cartoons. I would say we have record of over 150 different Shorty cartoons that were used to advertise. Yep.
I would love to get a look at those if
Yeah,
possible.
yeah.
Okay.
We have a bunch on the walls here in the tap room to look at. And they were actually designed by a cartoonist for the Milwaukee Journal named Ross Lewis.
Okay.
And actually, if you look at them, which it's kind of funny because they ran mostly in the 40s and 50s, which I think we think of as a time where things were a little more modest.
Mm-hmm.
But you look at some of these cartoons and they're a little risque. Like,
Yeah?
yeah, there's some that are a little risque, you know, which is fun and
Enjoy responsibly.
yeah, yes. And actually, the original Shorty was produced so close to Prohibition, which, like I said, it was January of 1940. But at the time, coming out of Prohibition, even that, you know, 10-ish years later, you had to have, in order for any beer to be transported over state lines, it had to say export on it. So if you look at the very original, the first Shorty bottle that was released in 1940, it says export on it, and then the rest do not. Just say Rhinelander Shorty. So after that first run, that was lifted, it didn't have to say export on it anymore. And I know that caused a lot of confusion now because we think export, so we think like international.
Yeah.
But that's actually not the case for that original bottle.
Just interstate.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. And some of the slogans for the Shorty cartoons were like, who's Shorty, where's Shorty, Shorty is good for this or that, gotta get it, gotta get it, gotta get it, gotta get the Shorty. You know, there's a bunch of different cute little slogans with those cartoons. You know, there's one with a diver with a Shorty bottle, and there's some topless mermaids with him. Yeah. One of our best-selling prints here is actually a fisherman. He's fishing for a muskie, but he's got a case, one of the old cases of the Shorties. So they used to come in like the wooden cases, and then I believe there was some sort of like buyback program where if you brought the case and the empty bottles back, it would only be so much to get it refilled or to replace it. And so, yeah, he's sitting in his little boat with a case of Shorties, and he's actually got Shorty bottles on the end to fish for the big muskie that's underneath him. And, yeah, they're cute and fun. So when it came time for Otto Dietz to leave, like I said, was about 1966. Part of what people believe he left for was that he wasn't quite getting along with management at the time, kind of didn't see it going in a great direction, and he was actually right, because 1 year later, in 1967, the brewery had to close its doors. And it's reported to be mostly for tax evasion and fraud.
Hey, listener, I have to interrupt with a quick note here. While this is the story as told by Rhinelander Brewing Company, and I tend to believe their version of events, I have not, in my research, been able to verify tax evasion or fraud specifically as causes for the brewery's shutdown. I can only say for sure, based on reporting at the time, that the brewery was forced to file for bankruptcy. All right, back to it.
So the original brewery, despite burning down 4 years later, despite prohibition, if you want to go from very start to very finish there, it would be 1893 to 1967.
Yeah. Made it through some trials and then tax evasion.
Yes.
That's fun.
Right, is what eventually did it in. And the president and vice president at the time that it closed down were actually husband and wife. It was Herman Lassig and Lillian Lassig. And they had come in just in time to try to save the company from its financial doom, but did not quite work. Closing day was pretty bittersweet, yet an exciting day in Rhinelander as the feds came in and made them dump out all of their unsold beer. It's said that there are still a few old newspaper articles, which I personally have not seen yet, but at least it's said, where you can see pictures of the federal agents standing over Herman and watching him pour beer down one of the street drains.
Oh, no. That's a sad image.
Isn't it? Isn't it? We hate spilled beer. And just, to watch it, you're right. So then around 1970, about 3 years after the closing of the brewery, Joseph Huber Brewing Company, which is down in Monroe, Wisconsin, it's actually now Minhas, but was Joseph Huber at the time, had bought the rights of the Rhinelander Brewing name. And although they didn't have our recipes, they started putting our label on their super discount beer. So anytime you have people, we had a lot of people in here that went to college in like the 70s or 80s. And say, oh, I remember Rhinelander beer. It wasn't very good, but it was cheap, and that's why we drank it. It was actually Huber's beer with the Rhinelander label on it.
Okay. So that have to be licensed, or?
I'm not really. I mean, the label itself has its own, copyrights and everything to it. So they at least own the rights enough. And Huber actually did that for a lot of like the smaller breweries, or a lot of the ones that closed up. They kind of were like that big fish in a small pond that went around and would do that, and because the Rhinelander name had already been known for so many years, you know, they were able to mass produce one type of beer and put it out there under certain labels that people already had an association with that label or already bought that label. So that's kind of what they did there. And fun fact about Huber, Huber Brewing is that's actually where we get the term Huber for like work release if you're in jail from.
No way.
Because I guess that there used to be a jail or prison or something across the street from it, and they would have the prisoners or inmates come over and work for the brewery, and that's actually where we get the term Huber from, or Huber's Law is from Joseph Huber Brewing in Wisconsin. So
Pretty cool.
yeah.
Actually, I was going to show you this because I found this thing in a microfilm.
Yeah.
It's the 5th anniversary of re-legalization of beer, and the Rhinelander Brewing Company put out this thing that's like, we paid $60,000 in state and municipal taxes, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. It's like we're in your community, and it's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But
I
just,
can see that. Yeah.
ironic with the downfall that I just learned about.
Right. We paid all these taxes to get going again, just to however many years later not pay taxes, and then have to shut our doors and dump out all our beer because of it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's kind of the irony of it. So, yeah, they had our label on their beer from 1970 till the early 2000s.
Okay.
Somewhere in that, Huber became Minhas Brewing, which is still down in Monroe. And Minhas is actually a really fun place if anyone does want to go see it. We still tenant brew there, so basically we'll take over a day's operations. All their employees become our employees for that day. Things it's different than contract brewing, but they do a lot of contract brewing for places like Trader Joe's and
Okay.
all that. And contract brewing is more, a grocery store line or a gas station line or something will come to them and say, we want a specific beer or seltzer or something like that. That's just for our locations to
Yeah.
sell. And they'll work with them and contract that to be made and
Sure.
distributed to them. So it's a little different than what we do with tenant brewing, where we actually take over kind of operations for the day or so and to get everything.
So you just churn it out for...
Pretty much, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So, majority of the time the employees and everything there is working for Minhas, and then a couple days or whatever out of the year, whatever, they become Rhinelander Brewing employees for the
Okay.
day. So our current owner, Jyoti Aluk, she had bought the rights to Rhinelander in 2009. She had gotten involved because she was seeing a lot of older beer brands come back, kind of like Hams, Pabst, Schlitz, where you kind of had this revival of vintage beer. And she had connections to the Minhas Brewery in Monroe and knew that because of them prior, they were Huber prior. So they had a bunch of kind of those old vintage beer brand naming rights and labeling rights and everything just kind of sitting in their archives. So she went and dug through the archives and of all those defunct brands, and she fell in love with the story of the Shorty and the legend of the Hodag, and that's what made her decide on Rhinelander Brewing.
Okay.
So she had opened a small office in town, actually just a couple doors down, originally, and brought back the Shorty in 2011. Redesigned the smaller bottle, but kept the original recipe intact, or as much intact as possible. So we, for the first time since Huber had taken over, we finally got to go back to that original Rhinelander Brewing recipe
Okay.
to put back under our label. And she also introduced a brand new craft beer line, which is like the Thirsty Miner. There's a couple different IPAs in that. There's a chocolate stout, all of that. So she also brought in some new beers under the label. And so that original office was mostly just like merchandise, T-shirts, some of the packaged beer that we tenant brewed down in Monroe. All of that, and so that started in 2011, and then we began renovations here at the tap room, to turn this into the tap room, as well as to build the brewing system here for the craft beers that we could brew back in Rhinelander. Because, I mean, that was kind of one of the goals, right? We were able to bring the label back, able to bring the beer back to Rhinelander, but how do we get the beer brewed in Rhinelander again, right? So 2018 is actually when we opened our doors here. And on March 21st, just missing what was supposed to be St. Patty's Day debut, was our very first Hode Gallon Lager. So the very first beer brewed back in Rhinelander by Rhinelander Brewing Company, which was the Odag Irish Red Ale, which we do actually have on tap right now because we're coming up on St. Patrick's Day, right? And that Odag Irish Red Ale has actually won us 2 national awards in the last few years, a silver medal and then a gold medal last year in the Red Ale category of the U.S. Beer Open Championship. So
Very
we're pretty
nice.
proud of it, yes. And we officially celebrated our grand opening of the tap room on April 13th of 2018. So we've been here since.
Since then.
Mm-hmm.
So this Irish Red, that is available here. Is that kind of an exclusive in the tap room?
Yeah, so actually any of our Hode Ales and Lagers are exclusive to the tap
Right
room.
here.
Right. So you have, this is where like the way we operate now gets a little confusing, but once it's broken down, people tend to understand it a little more. Anything prepackaged, so canned, bottled, any of that under the Rhinelander label that you can go to a liquor store and buy or go to a grocery store and buy. Any of that is actually going to be what we tenant brew down Monroe. Because as you can see sitting here, we're quite a small, quaint, cozy operation, you know, right downtown. And so anything that we brew here on site actually only gets kegged and only goes on tap, and you can take it home in like a growler, howler, or crowler. I know. Growlers are like those big 64-ounce glass jugs, and then a howler is actually a half growler, so it's a 32-ounce glass jug. And then a crowler is a canned howler, which is a 32-ounce can that we fill off the tap and seal here right on site. Yep. Yep. So everything gets like fresh filled. If you want to take it home, that's a Hode Gale and Lager. I would say we cycle through about 60 plus different recipes every year. So you're here today, you could be here in 3 days, and there could be a new beer or two on. So it's kind of get it while we have it. There's a few staples like the Irish Red. We do an Ahoy Dag No Coast IPA. We do a cream ale, the Cowdag. Those are kind of staples that we've had for a long time that we know do really well, and we'll probably brew those quarterly. So that's about as frequent as you'll get that like one beer style, because we're constantly putting either we're coming up with something new, or we're bringing back a beer that is seasonal or that we only do twice a year. We team up with Art Start Inc. for sours, so I think we're on a year, anywhere from 1 to 2 years that we've been doing sour ales now, which we never did before. And we team up with Art Start for those, so that we actually call it a Tart Start line. Since they're sour and tart.
Cute.
Yes, cute. And we give them a portion of the proceeds from every batch that we do, and we try to make it a different flavor every time, because we think that that lines up with, like, you know, the artistic, you know, type thing is that they promote and everything, and just a great way to work with a nonprofit that's literally right behind us. So we're constantly bringing in new recipes, and then slowly cycling through the old stuff. So
is there any aspect of like experimentation with the new recipes, like a possibility of a tenant producing those? And
we would love to. I know that because of like the Irish Red success, we have looked at that. We actually just had the head of like brewing operations from Monroe at Minhas up here back in September when we had Gene Simmons here. Oh yeah, fun fact, we had Gene Simmons here a few months ago. And I know they were talking about that. Big thing is one thing that makes our beer different here right now is there's no preservatives in it. It's unpasteurized. And obviously that has to be modified if it were to be canned and to be, shelf stable. So those are just kind of some of the things we'd have to look at. And then you would think that it's a beer recipe, right? So you would think taking that recipe and say you want to make 10 times more beer, that you would just multiply everything on that recipe sheet by 10. That's not actually how it works.
Okay.
Our brewers here have to use a special software that does all the calculations for them. It's more science than it is baking. So not everything just completely scales up or scales down to adjust to the amount. So that would be another thing, is to brew at that capacity. It would be playing around with how to get the recipe where it is now for 3 barrels up to, yeah, that amount. And obviously it's not cheap to brew beer, and especially in a large amount. So you're running the risk of, what if it doesn't turn out great? There's also a waiting period there, right? You can't just, it's not like baking, where you bake something that day and you get to try it when it's done, right? It has to sit and ferment. Ales are usually about 3 weeks. Lagers can be more like 4 to 5, depending, and that really just depends on the type of yeast and everything that you use. So, yeah.
Boy, I wish I understood any of that. That'd be pretty interesting, probably.
Yeah. I've learned a lot. Our brewers obviously know more. It's, been fun to kind of sit in and learn more about that process ourselves. And you were talking about experimentation, and there's a lot of experimenting. One thing I would love to mention about our current brewers on site here is, they're always trying to come up with something new. Seltzers, we just started doing brewed seltzers. So a lot more, I would say they have more body and more flavor, because you're brewing it. You're not just taking like flavored seltzer water and alcohol and throwing them together like you would for like your canned seltzers and things like that.
Is that what White Claw is?
Yeah, it's like flavored seltzer water and vodka, I'm pretty
That's
sure.
what it is.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
All right, so brewing it here.
Right, so we brew it, which is different. And it's basically a lot more of your like corn sugar and then no grain. So one thing that's great about the seltzers is they're grain-free, gluten-free. So it offers that additional option to people who need that or just like that. And we've done a different flavor every time for those, and our next one is actually going to be like an apple caramel whiskey.
Okay.
Which I know sounds weird for a seltzer, right? But yeah, I mean, our very first seltzer, I think, was like I don't know if it was our first or second, but it was a chocolate strawberry, and it was for last year's Valentine's Day. And I remember my reaction was like, chocolate in a seltzer? Like, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
And it came out phenomenal, because it just has more, I guess I use the term body because that's the term used in beer. It's basically, I don't want to say thickness, but the feeling that something has like on your tongue, right? Whether it's light light body or heavy body. So it just has more body than what a lot of people would imagine.
Used to
with like a canned seltzer,
Sure.
right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so always doing something new, always testing out a new recipe, and it's a lot of fun. It keeps things interesting.
Cool. Is that where the magic happens?
That is where
Back
the
there?
magic happens. Yep,
Okay.
very small. We have 6 fermenters, 3-barrel fermenters. We actually operate on a 1-barrel brew system, so that means to fill 1 3-barrel fermenter, they actually have to run through the brewing process 3 times in the kettles to create those 3 barrels to fill the fermenter. So it's quite long days. I think they usually do a double brew day, so they'll do the two barrels worth of brewing one day, which I would estimate about 12 to 16 hours.
Wow.
And then they'll brew the 3rd batch the next day, just to fill that 1 fermenter. So
are the current brewers, I just wonder how you learn to do this. Are they coming from a microbrewing or brewing at home?
So kind of, we have one that's a home brewer, Brian, and he's actually the middle school art teacher here in town.
Oh,
So
Carpenter, right?
yes,
Yes,
Brian
yeah.
Carpenter, and he was actually my middle school art teacher.
Yep.
But so he's here, especially during the school year. He's not here quite as much, but he's one of our assistant brewers, and he's been here since the start. So he did work under Al, our original head brewer, and then James and Jake. Now James is like our head of brewing operations, and then Jake is another assistant brewer. They both learned here. So James actually came in. I think he had interest in home brewing, but I'm not sure if he had ever really done much home brewing. But he came in to work in the tap room as a beer tender, and ended up learning about the brewing process to the point that he now runs that whole portion. And then he also trained in Jake, and that's kind of a cool thing with here too is you can learn as much as you want about that process, and they're willing to take any of our beer tenders or whatever under their wing and show them what they do and teach them if they're interested, and it's awesome.
It's awesome.
Hmm.
So I got a few random questions
Yeah.
to kind of jumping around. But, well, first, this is an article. It's one sentence from 1897 that Mr. Otto Hilgerman will soon commence the erection of a large residence on his lots just south of his brewery.
Yes.
The things that work, the passed for news, right?
Right.
But
And I do know that house is still there.
is that the Victorian?
I'm not sure exactly which one it is.
Okay.
I haven't. Let me see. Actually, I have it.
Oh, yeah?
So yes, I believe it is the big Victorian. That's still there.
Okay, so that is the brewer's.
Mhm.
there.
Yep, there's a picture there, and I do know I had a lady in here sometime in the past year, I believe, as just a customer, and she had said that she actually, like when she was a child, they lived in that house for a bit, and the windows are all, or at least most of them, were still the original pane glass at the
Yeah.
time, and it was carved, like etched into the glass, his name.
Oh, wow.
Because that's how, when they had to custom make the panes of glass, that's how they would know where, they
Yeah.
were making them for. And so she said that as a child, she grew up in like his name was like still etched in to a lot of like the window panes.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Incidentally, my grandfather also lived there for a while as a child.
Really?
And so I wanted to ask if you know anything about if there's any truth to the rumors of a tunnel that went under the road from the brewery to that house.
See, I have heard about it. I'm not sure if there's any truth to it. I wouldn't be surprised though, because I do believe there were tunnels from the old funeral home across the street here,
Okay.
which is now the music store, and that's actually has the Morgue Coffee Company in it, and that's why when they put the coffee shop in, they called it the Morgue, because it used to actually be Rhinelander's original morgue, to having tunnels to the original owner's house as well. So at night when they had a call in or whatever, they could go down, and it's cold and blistery up here.
Sure.
So I'm sure if people could like build a way to get to and from work without having to go out in negative 20 degrees with 40-mile-per-hour winds, I wouldn't blame them if
Yeah.
they could do it. Did you ask your grandfather if they uncovered any tunnels when he was?
He said absolutely there was a tunnel that went over there.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, and then I've spoken to other people who say they've been down there to look, and it's all the same wall. Like, it doesn't look like anything
Okay.
was replaced or bricked up. So
Right.
I tend to believe my grandpa. He's also a world-class BSer, so
Yeah.
it's hard to know, but
Yeah.
it's fun to think about.
Yeah. I mean, that obviously stems from somewhere, right? And then
Yeah.
I believe it's the Hilgermans. Don't quote me on this.
Mhm.
But the building 2 doors over, it's now Wildflowers on Brown.
Mhm.
A section of that was owned by the Hilgermans as well. Because I believe the current owner of it had brought our owner up when she was here in September to look at it. And
Okay.
so I'm pretty sure the Hilgermans owned a section of this downtown building as well, just a couple doors down. It's kind of, the history of small towns is fun, and it's kind of funny how things like circle back too, right?
It
So who would have thought that, you know, if they did own that part of that building that's literally 2 doors down from us, who would have thought back then that like the brewery would be here now, right?
Flop
So,
down.
and I do know the original, a lot of people ask about the original brewery on Ocala Street, and that's not there anymore. I'm not sure what happened to that original building, why it's not there anymore.
So after the fire, did they rebuild in that
They
same
did.
place?
Yep,
Okay.
yep. They rebuilt right away. So, and like I said, the fire was only like 4 years after it originally opened.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of the funny thing about, you know, we go over our history and when we do taproom tours and stuff like that with people. And it's just kind of one of the funny things, like you said yourself, where the original brewery went through so much, right? From burning down to prohibition and and everything, just to end up like for tax evasion to be what or put the final nail in the coffin, right? So
any last thing you feel like, or is that pretty much it?
Yeah, I mean, so we might not be in that original building here, but the building that we are in downtown has a lot of history. All of these downtown buildings are very old and have been here for a long time. So, you know, we still have the history here. We actually used to be a furniture and appliance store, which is kind of fun. But so definitely, if people are ever interested, you know, come check it out. Like I said, we have all those, a bunch of like the original Shorty cartoons on the wall. We do the tour where we go over this history with you and actually take you into the brew room and explain a little bit more of the brewing process. And there's constantly different beers, so if anyone does want to stop in, that's, you know, we're always doing something and always have something new to try. So we love talking to people about the area and our history and everything. So
Cool. And as mentioned earlier, there were a few spots in the story that could use some elucidation. So if you have knowledge of the circumstances of the brewery's 1967 closure, if you have one of the rumored photos of Herman pouring out beer at the behest of federal agents, if you have knowledge of the existence or non-existence of the tunnel, please let us know in the comments on Facebook or Instagram, or email us at thesewoods@rhinelanderlibrary.org. Thanks for listening to another episode of If These Woods Could Talk, produced by the Rhinelander District Library. A special thanks to the Old Pine Road Band for the musical theme. To learn how you can record your own story of the Northwoods, or to suggest a topic or storyteller, contact the library or check out the website at rhinelanderlibrary.org.